When my wife's toxic friends convinced her to pack a bag and disappear for a week to teach me a lesson, they thought I'd come crawling back begging. Instead, I picked up the phone and made a call that would turn their little game upside down. While she was celebrating her victory with those bitter women, I was taking action they never saw coming. My name is Miles Doyle. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building something I thought would last forever. Not just my marriage to Cindy, but also my tire installation business that started as a single shop and grew into a network of 5 locations across our city. I worked my tail off to provide for my family, my wife Cindy, who's 39, our 16-year-old son Dylan, and our 12-year-old daughter Emma. The irony is that success might have been what destroyed us. When I was struggling to get the first shop off the ground, working 16-hour days with grease under my fingernails, Cindy and I were solid. We were a team. She'd bring me dinner at the shop, help with the books, even swept the floor when I was too exhausted to do it myself. But as the business grew and money started flowing in, something shifted. Cindy got a job at the bank downtown, said she wanted her own career, her own identity. I supported that completely. I wanted her to be happy, to have something that was hers. What I didn't expect was that she'd find herself a whole new group of friends who seemed determined to tear apart everything we'd built together. The first time I met Veronica Sterling, I knew she was bad news. She walked into our house like she owned the place, wearing clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. Perfectly manicured nails, designer purse, and an attitude that screamed entitlement. She was 45, divorced twice, and seemed to take pride in both failures like they were achievements. Veronica had this way of talking to Cindy that made my skin crawl. She'd make these little comments about how Cindy was wasting her potential and how she deserved better than being tied down to a husband and kids. She'd talk about her own divorces like they were victories, bragging about how much money she got from each ex-husband. That should have been my first red flag. Any woman who celebrates destroying marriages shouldn't be welcome in a married woman's life. But Cindy ate it up like gospel truth. The change didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Cindy started staying out later after work, claiming she was having girls' nights with her new friends. She started questioning everything I did, from how I ran my business to how I disciplined our kids. She'd throw around phrases that sounded exactly like things Veronica would say. The tire business was booming, and honestly, that success might have blinded me to what was happening at home. By 2023, I had 5 locations running like clockwork, each one pulling in serious revenue. My original shop on Main Street had become the flagship, but the newer locations in the suburbs were where the real money was. Soccer moms with SUVs, contractors with heavy trucks, they all needed tires, and my shops provided quality service at fair prices. Dylan had started working part-time at the downtown location, learning the business from the ground up just like I did. The kid had good hands and wasn't afraid of hard work. I figured he might take over the business someday, keep the Doyle name going strong. Emma was still focused on school and her soccer team, but she'd come by the shop sometimes, charming customers with that smile that reminded me so much of her mother. That's the thing that hurt the most. Cindy used to smile at me like that. Back when we were starting out, when money was tight and dreams were big, she'd look at me like I could conquer the world. Now, when she looked at me at all, it was with this cold indifference that cut deeper than any argument. The change became obvious during our family dinners. We used to talk about everything: the kids' school activities, business plans, weekend trips. Now Cindy would sit there picking at her food, barely participating in conversations. When she did speak up, it was usually to criticize something I'd done or said. One evening, Dylan was telling us about a college recruiter who'd called about his grades and athletic performance. The kid was excited, talking about maybe getting scholarship to play baseball. I was proud as hell, ready to celebrate. But Cindy just shrugged and said college was expensive and maybe he should consider community college instead. I stared at her in disbelief. This was our son's future we were talking about, and she was acting like his dreams didn't matter. When I pointed out that we could afford to send him wherever he wanted to go, thanks to the business I'd built, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about throwing money around. Later that night, I tried to talk to her about it. I asked Cindy what was really going on, why she seemed so unhappy all the time. She told me I wouldn't understand because I was too focused on work to notice what was happening in our family. According to her, I was neglecting my responsibilities as a husband and father. That stung because I knew it wasn't true. Everything I did was for this family. Every early morning, every late night at the shops, every business decision I made was about giving my wife and kids the best life possible. But somehow, in Cindy's mind, my success had become a failure. I started paying closer attention after that conversation, and what I saw scared me. My wife was becoming a stranger, and I had no idea how to get her back. My mother, Eleanor, had never been one to bite her tongue, and at 67, she sure wasn't going to start now. She'd been watching the changes in Cindy with the sharp eye of a woman who'd seen her share of life's disappointments. When she asked me to come over for coffee one Saturday morning, I knew something was on her mind. Eleanor Doyle was sitting at her kitchen table, the same one where she'd fed me breakfast for 18 years before I moved out. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, and her blue eyes held that determined look I remembered from my childhood when she had something important to say. "Miles, we need to talk about your wife," she said, not bothering with small talk. I sighed and took a seat across from her. "Mom, please don't start." "Don't start what?" "Caring about my son and grandchildren." Eleanor poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one with World's Best Son, that she'd given me years ago. "I've been watching Cindy, and that woman is not the same person you married." She was right, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. "Marriage has its ups and downs, Mom. You know that." Eleanor snorted. "Ups and downs are one thing. Complete personality changes are another." Last Sunday at church, Cindy barely spoke to anyone. She used to light up that whole congregation with her smile. Now she acts like being there is some kind of punishment. That hit home because I'd noticed it too. Cindy used to love our church community, volunteered for every bake sale and charity drive. Now she complained about having to go, said it was a waste of time. Just last week, she'd rolled her eyes when Pastor Miller asked about her helping with the youth fundraiser. And those friends of hers, Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge. That Sterling woman, particularly. I've heard things about her around town, Miles. She's poison, and she's spreading it to your wife. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything I've been trying to ignore. "What kind of things?" "The kind that destroy families," my mother said firmly. "She brags about her divorces like they're trophies. Takes pride in how much money she got from each husband. Women like that can't stand to see other people happy in marriage because it reminds them of their own failures." Eleanor reached across the table and grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Son, you need to fight for your family before it's too late. That woman is filling Cindy's head with nonsense, and if you don't put a stop to it, you're going to lose everything you've worked for." The coffee grew cold as my mother continued, telling me about conversations she'd overheard at the grocery store, warnings from other women in the community about Veronica's influence. It painted a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore anymore. "Your father, God rest his soul, would have put his foot down the first time some troublemaker tried to come between us," Eleanor said. "Sometimes being a good husband means protecting your marriage from people who want to destroy it, even if one of those people is your own wife." I drove home that day with my mother's words echoing in my head, knowing she was right, but not sure I was ready for the fight that was coming. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I made it home early from the West Side shop, hoping to spend some quality time with the family. Instead, I walked into what sounded like a therapy session from hell. Cindy was sitting in our living room with Veronica and two other women I didn't recognize, and they were dissecting marriages like surgeons with scalpels. "The problem with men," Veronica was saying, swirling her wine glass like she was at some fancy social event, "is they think providing money is the same thing as being a good husband. They work all day and expect us to be grateful for the crumbs they throw our way." One of the other women, a redhead I'd never seen before, laughed bitterly. "Tell me about it. My ex used to think buying me jewelry would make up for ignoring me the rest of the year. Like a diamond bracelet was supposed to substitute for actual conversation." The third woman, blonde and probably in her early 40s, nodded enthusiastically. "They use work as an excuse to avoid real intimacy. Sorry, honey, can't talk now. Gotta provide for the family." Meanwhile, we're dying inside from loneliness. I stood in the hallway, listening to these women tear apart the institution of marriage with the enthusiasm of teenagers gossiping about classmates. But what really got to me was hearing Cindy's voice join in. "Miles thinks because his tire business is successful, he's automatically a good father and husband," my wife said, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. But success doesn't mean anything if you're not emotionally available. He comes home expecting dinner on the table and praise for working hard. Like that's all there is to marriage. Emotionally available? I worked my tail off so she could have everything she wanted. I never missed a parent-teacher conference, never missed one of Emma's soccer games or Dylan's baseball tournaments. I took the family on vacations every year, made sure they had the best of everything. When had that stop being enough? Veronica's voice cut through my thoughts. Men like that are controllers, Cindy. They use financial security as a leash to keep you dependent. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to spend the rest of your life being grateful for scraps? Or are you going to demand what you deserve? That's when I'd heard enough. I walked into the living room, and the conversation stopped like someone had hit a mute button. For pairs of eyes turned to look at me, and I felt like I'd interrupted something I wasn't supposed to witness. Ladies, I said, keeping my voice level and polite despite the anger building in my chest. I hope you're having a nice visit. Veronica smiled that fake smile of hers, the one that never reached her eyes. Miles, we were just having some girl talk. Nothing that would interest you, I'm sure. Actually, it sounded pretty interesting from where I was standing, I replied, meeting her gaze directly. Especially the part about controllers and leashes. Care to elaborate? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Cindy's face flushed red, either from embarrassment or anger. I couldn't tell which. The other two women suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses. We should probably get going, the redhead said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were headed. Thanks for the wine, Cindy. After they left, gathering their purses with the speed of people fleeing a crime scene, Cindy turned on me like I'd committed some terrible crime. How dare you embarrass me like that in front of my friends, she hissed. Embarrass you? I stare at my wife in disbelief. I came home to find you talking about our marriage like it's some kind of prison sentence. How do you think that made me feel? The worst part about watching your marriage fall apart isn't the sleepless nights or the cold shoulders. It's seeing your kids try to navigate the wreckage while pretending everything's normal. Dylan and Emma weren't stupid. They could feel the tension in the house, see how their mother had changed, hear the arguments that stopped the moment they walked into a room. Dylan started spending more time at the tire shop, claiming he wanted to learn the business better. But I knew the real reason. Home wasn't comfortable anymore. The kid would show up after school, grab a wrench, and work on whatever project needed doing. We'd work side by side in companionable silence, both of us avoiding the elephant in the room. Dad, he said one afternoon while we were rotating tires on Mrs. Henderson's Honda, is everything okay with you and Mom? I stopped what I was doing and looked at my 16-year-old son, this young man who was already taller than me and had his mother's eyes. How do you explain to your kid that the woman who raised him was becoming someone you didn't recognize? Your mom's going through some changes, son, I said finally. Sometimes adults need time to figure things out. Dylan nodded, but I could see he wasn't buying the diplomatic answer. She's different now. She used to ask about my baseball games, help with homework. Now she barely looks up from her phone when I talk to her. That hurt because it was true. Cindy used to be the kind of mother who made homemade cookies for school events and knew all of Dylan's friends by name. Now she acted like parenting was an inconvenience that interrupted her social life. Emma was handling it differently. My 12-year-old daughter had started having what she called tummy aches that kept her home from school. The school counselor called last week, concerned about Emma's grades slipping and her withdrawal from activities she used to love. When I talked to Emma about it, sitting on her bed surrounded by soccer trophies and stuffed animals, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Why doesn't Mommy love us anymore? She asked. The question hit me like a truck. Baby girl, Mommy loves you very much. She's just confused right now. She never comes to my games anymore, Emma whispered. And when I try to tell her about school, she says she's too busy or tired. I pulled my daughter close, feeling her small frame shake with quiet sobs. This wasn't just about Cindy and me anymore. These toxic women weren't just destroying my marriage. They were destroying my children's relationship with their mother. That night, after both kids were asleep, I made a decision. I couldn't control what Cindy chose to do or who she chose to listen to, but I could protect my children from the fallout. They deserved better than walking on eggshells in their own home. The discovery came by accident, the way these things usually do. I was balancing our business accounts when I noticed some unusual activity on our joint personal checking account. Large withdrawals, transfers I didn't recognize, payments to places I'd never heard of. At first, I figured it was identity theft or some kind of banking error. Then I started digging deeper. $5,000 transferred to something called Sterling Consulting. Another $3,000 to a spa in the next county. $2,000 for what looked like a shopping spree at some boutique downtown. All of this happening over the past 6 months, all authorized by Cindy. I sat in my office at the main shop, staring at bank statements that told the story of financial betrayal. My wife had been systematically moving money out of our accounts, spending it on God knows what, without saying a word to me. Money that was supposed to be for the kids' college funds, for our retirement, for emergencies. The Sterling Consulting payment was what really got my blood boiling. I made some calls and found out it wasn't a consulting business at all. It was Veronica's personal account. Cindy had been paying this woman, literally paying her to destroy our marriage. When I confronted Cindy that evening, she didn't even try to deny it. "So what if I spent some money?" she said, crossing her arms defiantly. "Half of everything you make is mine anyway. I shouldn't have to ask permission to spend my own money." "Your own money?" I stared at her in disbelief. That money was for Emma's braces, for Dylan's college applications. "We had plans for that money." "Plans you made," Cindy shot back. "You always decide everything, Miles. Where we live, how we spend money, what the kids should do." "Well, maybe I'm tired of living according to your plans." "Those plans included taking care of our family," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "What exactly did you pay Veronica Sterling $5,000 for?" Cindy's face went pale. She hadn't expected me to trace that particular transaction. "That's none of your business." "It's absolutely my business when it's our money." I pulled out the bank statements and spread them on the kitchen table. "Look at this, Cindy. Look what you've done. You spent almost $15,000 in 6 months on what? Spa treatments? Designer clothes? Paying some bitter divorcee to tell you how terrible your husband is." For a moment, I saw something like shame flicker across her face. But then her expression hardened again, and I knew Veronica's poison had sunk too deep. "I deserve those things," she said. "I've sacrificed 20 years of my life for this family. If I want to spend some money on myself for once, that's my right." That's when I knew our marriage was beyond saving. The woman I'd married would never have stolen money from her children's future to fund her midlife crisis. I should have known something was brewing when Cindy started packing a bag on that Tuesday morning. She was moving around the bedroom with the kind of determined energy I hadn't seen from her in months, folding clothes like she was preparing for battle rather than a simple trip. "Where are you going?" I asked, watching her stuff toiletries into a small travel case. Cindy didn't look up from her packing. "I'm going to stay with Veronica for a while. We both need some time to think about what we really want from this marriage. We both need time." I stood there in my work clothes, coffee mug in hand, trying to process what I was hearing. I'm not the one who's been stealing money and bad-mouthing our family to a group of bitter, divorced women. That got her attention. She straightened up and fixed me with a look that could have frozen hell over. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Miles," she said, zipping up the bag with sharp, angry motions. "You always have to be right. You always have to be the victim. Well, maybe it's time you learn what it feels like to be alone for a while." I set my coffee down on the dresser, feeling something cold and final settling in my chest. "So this is what your friends advised? Pack a bag and leave your family to teach your husband a lesson." "My friends told me I deserve better than this," Cindy shot back. "They told me that if I disappear for a week, you'll realize how much you need me and start treating me with the respect I deserve." There it was. My wife's bad friends had told her to leave for a week to teach me a lesson, just like my mother had warned me they would. These women had turned abandoning your family into some kind of power play. "And if I don't come crawling back, begging you to return?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Cindy's confidence faltered for just a second, but then she lifted her chin defiantly. "Then I guess we'll both know where we stand." She grabbed her bag and headed for the bedroom door, pausing only to deliver what she clearly thought was her killing blow. "Dylan and Emma are going to stay with your mother while I'm gone," she said. "I've already arranged it. That way you can focus on thinking about what you've done wrong without any distractions." I watched my wife walk out of her bedroom, heard her footsteps on the stairs, listened to the front door slam behind her. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed we'd shared for 15 years and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. But as I sat there, something interesting happened. Instead of the panic or desperation Cindy and her friends probably expected, I felt something else entirely. Relief. For For the first time in months, the house was quiet. The tension was gone. The constant walking on eggshells was over. Maybe this week apart would teach someone a lesson, all right. Just not the lesson Cindy was expecting. After Cindy left, I called my mother to let her know the kids would be coming to stay with her. Eleanor's voice was grim, but unsurprised when I explained the situation. "I told you this was coming, son," she said. "That woman thinks she can manipulate you like she's been manipulating everyone else. What are you going to do about it?" I looked around the house that suddenly felt different without Cindy's presence. Cleaner somehow. Less toxic. "I'm going to call a lawyer, Mom." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure it's what I need to do," I replied. Cindy made her choice when she decided to let her friends turn her against her own family. If she wants to play games, she's about to learn that I don't play games when it comes to protecting my children. After I hung up with my mother, I sat in my home office and did something I never thought I'd have to do. I started researching divorce attorneys in our area. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Cindy was probably celebrating her freedom at Veronica's house, I was taking steps to make that freedom permanent. The law firm of Bradley and Associates had good reviews and a solid reputation for handling complex divorces involving business assets. I made an appointment for that same afternoon, figuring if I was going to do this, I might as well do it right. James Bradley was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen every variation of marital disaster imaginable. His office was lined with law books and family photos, the kind of place that inspired confidence in people facing the worst days of their lives. "Tell me about your situation, Miles," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. I laid out the whole story: Cindy's transformation, the toxic friends, the financial betrayal, and finally this morning's ultimatum. Bradley listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "How many business locations do you have?" he asked when I finished. 5 tire installation centers, all profitable. The business is worth about $2 million, maybe more. Bradley nodded. "And your wife has been systematically moving money out of your accounts. Nearly $15,000 over 6 months, that I know of. We can work with this," he said, his tone becoming more businesslike. "In cases involving financial misconduct and abandonment of the family home, Virginia courts tend to be sympathetic to the wronged spouse, especially when children are involved." I signed a retainer agreement that afternoon. As I walked out of Bradley's office with divorce papers in my briefcase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was the one taking action instead of just reacting to Cindy's increasingly erratic behavior. My wife's friends had told her to leave for a week to teach me a lesson. Well, they were about to learn what happens when you mess with a man who's had enough of their games. On Friday afternoon, exactly 5 days after Cindy left, she came back. I was in my home office, reviewing the divorce papers Bradley had prepared, when I heard her key in the front door. The sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floor echoed through the house like gunshots. She appeared in the doorway of my office, looking like she expected me to jump up and embrace her with relief. Instead, I stayed seated at my desk, watching her with the detached interest you might show a stranger. "I'm back," she announced, like this was some kind of gift she was bestowing on me. "I can see that," I replied, closing the folder containing the divorce documents. "How was your vacation?" The casual tone in my voice seemed to throw her off balance. She'd probably expected tears, apologies, maybe some desperate speech about how much I'd missed her. "It wasn't a vacation, Miles," she said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I'd grown to dislike. "It was time for both of us to think about what we really want from this marriage." I leaned back in my chair, studying the woman I'd once thought I'd spend my life with. "And what did you decide you want, Cindy?" "I want things to change," she said, crossing her arms. "I want you to stop taking me for granted. I want you to appreciate what you have before it's too late." That's when I started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when you realize just how ridiculous a situation has become. "What's so funny?" Cindy demanded. I stood up and walked over to my filing cabinet, pulling out a manila envelope. "What's funny is that you actually thought this little stunt would work. You thought if you disappeared for a week, I'd come crawling back, begging you to stay. Didn't you miss me at all?" she asked, and for the first time since she'd returned, I heard uncertainty in her voice. "You know what I missed, Cindy? I missed the woman I married. The one who would never have stolen money from her children's future. The one who wouldn't have let a group of bitter divorced women convince her to abandon her family. I handed her the envelope. These are divorce papers. I filed them Wednesday morning, right after you left to teach me that lesson. Cindy's face went white as she opened the envelope. Her hand shook as she read the first page. You're bluffing, she whispered. You wouldn't actually divorce me over this. I'm not bluffing, Cindy. The marriage is over. Your friends got exactly what they wanted, another divorce to add to their collection. She dropped the papers and reached for my arm. Miles, please. We can work this out. I'll stop seeing them. I'll change. But I gently pulled away from her touch. It's too late for that. You made your choice when you chose their poison over our family. The divorce took 8 months to finalize, but those were 8 months of clarity instead of confusion. Cindy fought it at first, tried to claim I was being unreasonable and cruel. But when the financial records came out during discovery, showing exactly how much money she'd stolen and where it had gone, her attorney advised her to settle quickly. I kept the tire business in our house. Cindy got a fair settlement, but nothing like what she would have received if she hadn't been caught stealing from our accounts. The judge was particularly unimpressed with her explanation that the money was for personal growth and self-discovery. Dylan chose to live with me full-time. At 17, he was old enough to make that decision, and he'd seen enough of his mother's behavior to understand what had really happened. He's working at the main shop every day after school now, learning the business from the ground up. Emma splits her time between both houses, but she spends most weeknights with me. Cindy tries to be a good mother when she has her, but the damage to their relationship runs deep. Kids don't forget when a parent chooses toxic friends over family. As for me, I'm doing better than I expected. The business is thriving. Turns out, not having someone constantly undermining your confidence is good for productivity. I've opened a 6th location and hired 3 new employees. About 6 months after the divorce was final, I started seeing someone new. Ashley Thompson is 30 years old, works as a nurse at the Children's Hospital, and has never been married. She's kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in my kids and my business. Most importantly, she doesn't have any bitter divorced friends filling her head with poison about men and marriage. We're taking things slow, but for the first time in years, I'm optimistic about the future. Dylan likes her, and Emma is warming up to her gradually. That's all I can ask for. Cindy is still friends with Veronica Sterling and the rest of that toxic group. From what I hear around town, she's dating some guy 15 years younger than her and living in a tiny apartment across town. Veronica convinced her that this was living her best life, but from the few times I've seen Cindy at school events, she looks tired and older than her years. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things ended, if I wish I'd fought harder to save a marriage. The answer is no. A marriage is supposed to be a partnership between 2 people who respect each other and work toward common goals. What I had with Cindy at the end wasn't a marriage. It was a hostage situation. My advice to any man going through something similar is simple. Don't let toxic people poison your family. If your spouse chooses bitter friends over your marriage, believe what they're showing you and protect yourself accordingly. Sometimes the lesson someone tries to teach you isn't the lesson they intended.